Episode number 3 with happiness guru, Dr. Raj Raghunathan. Welcome to The Art of Excellence, a show about people doing extraordinary things in their lives. I'm your host, Glenn Zweig. Thanks for joining me. My guest today is Dr. Raj Raghunathan. Raj is a professor of marketing at the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas. In addition to his work in the marketing field, he has also become an expert in the field of happiness. He is the author of a book, If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Happy? He teaches an MBA course on happiness and also teaches on the online teaching platform Coursera, a course entitled A Life of Happiness and Fulfillment. It is consistently ranked one of the top 10 courses on Coursera, and to date has drawn over 170,000 students. The course draws from a variety of disciplines, including positive psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral decision theory. It is my great honor to welcome Raj to the program today.
Thank you very much, Glenn. I really appreciate being here.
If you go back in time, when you're going through school, when you're studying for your PhD in business, would you have had any idea whatsoever that today we'd be sitting here having a podcast talking about happiness, that you've written a book on happiness, that you're teaching a course on happiness, that you're here in Atlanta right now meeting with me because you were a guest lecturer speaking to a huge crowd on happiness? Is this completely, out of left field, or was this in the grand scheme of things?
Well, it wasn't planned. It wasn't consciously planned. Let me put it that way. Because I think that for a very long time, I've had a very keen interest in the topic of happiness. And I think that interest was guiding me at some level. For instance, when I applied for jobs during my MBA, I did not apply to any and all jobs. I only applied to those jobs that I felt that were aligned with my interests and what I would enjoy doing. And already I think that I was starting to take decisions that indicated that what I was ultimately interested in is leading a happy, fulfilling, meaningful life. And I used to read a lot of books on the topic of happiness, mostly spiritual pop psych kind of books. And when I got my PhD, started my PhD in marketing, I did it in an area that's aligned with happiness. It was on the influence of emotions on people's decision making. But it wasn't until 2007 that I suddenly had this kind of awakening moment, more or less, where I just felt that, if ultimately everything we do is so that we can lead happy and fulfilling lives, and if educators, as an educator myself, I ask myself this question, am I helping my students lead happier, more fulfilling lives? Because I discovered that I myself wasn't as happy as I thought I would be, given all my accomplishments and everything on paper. And I noticed that same phenomenon unfolding with a lot of my peers who were really successful, but not necessarily very happy. And so that was like a wake-up moment for me. And then I decided that I was going to put this course together. This was back in 2007. And 2009 is when I began teaching it. And at that time, I wasn't at all, optimistic that this was going to be something that I did for several years and a book would come out of it, a Coursera course would come out of it, etc. All those were basically a kind of a snowballing effect that happened without any kind of major expectation on my part. It just, again, goes to show that there's a lot of hunger for the topic, even among MBA students, or maybe I should say especially among the business school students, and by extrapolation, I think the business crowd, because I think they have a lot of money, they have a lot of other things going on in their lives, and therefore they know from personal experience, right, that more money, more fame, more status, etc., doesn't necessarily add up to more happiness. And so they really are looking for the answer to the question, I feel.
Before we dig into the thesis of the book, and is it me, or has this whole concept of happiness, introspection, trying to figure out what makes for a fulfilling life, I feel like this wasn't a hot topic. And it feels like in the last, maybe 5 to 10 years, all of a sudden, there's a proliferation of books, of courses, of websites, of motivational speakers. Why is that? Are we more miserable than we used to be? Are we more introspective as a society? What's behind all that?
It's all you. It's all you, Glenn.
It's all me. Okay, well, I figured that. Well, that ends the interview, I guess.
No. I think you're right. I think that there's been a big upsurge in the interest in this topic. And I would kind of attribute this to at least three different trends, right? One big trend is that we've had a bigger and bigger proportion of people who have reached a level of wealth and access to resources and a set of exposure to experiences where they know, I think it was Jim Carrey or somebody who said something like, I wish everybody would be famous and successful, because then they would know that more fame and more success doesn't necessarily add up to more happiness, right? And I think that to some extent his wish has come true. I think in the last maybe 15, 20, maybe even 25 years, there's just a critical mass of people in the millions probably around the world who know from personal experience that they are not happy despite having a lot of resources and access to resources, right? So if you go back maybe 200, 300 years back, and the only people who could say that, more money is not going to make you happier are the kings and the queens and the aristocrats, perhaps, right? Now we have far more number of people. Second big trend is that in the last 20 years especially, we have had a significant amount of body of work on the topic of happiness in science, right? Especially in this area called positive psychology. We did not used to have such a big field with a lot of very smart, very dedicated researchers going all out studying this topic. We just didn't have it. I mean, if 30, 40 years back, you had to come up with an answer to the question, what are the determinants of happy and fulfilling life, you would have had to depend on your personal experiences and the experiences of other people and maybe wise people, God men, and so on and so forth. But in the last 20 years, all that has changed. That's the second big mega trend, I would say. And the third one, which I think is kind of like contributed to all this, is the emergence of the internet and the proliferation of information. And I think that has just allowed people to access all this information to such an extent, including the MOOC that we talked about some time back, that is just kind of skyrocketed, kind of jet fueled, if you will. I don't know if that's an expression, but this whole movement. And so we have a lot of people now exploring this interest, which has always been there. It's just that we didn't have enough science. We didn't have enough people who were truly, authentically motivated. They were just kind of conceptually interested. But now, from deep within, there's a kind of a welling up of this interest in the topic of happiness. That's what is happening.
And as you mentioned, one of the things I really liked about the book is, well, technically you could maybe say it's in the self-help genre. This is not a fluff piece. I mean, there was a lot of research,
right?
Your own research of others that you give attribution to throughout the book. And indeed, there was quite a bit of science behind the studies showing that we're getting closer to finding the formula.
Yes.
I really enjoyed that part.
Yeah, so I think there's different kinds of books on happiness, and there's some books that are more spiritual, other books that are more scientific, and given my background, I felt that it was important for me to stick to the science and not come to any conclusion that I couldn't back up with the science. And so I made sure that I checked that box in this book.
Let's dig into the book. The title, again, starts with "You're So Smart."
Mm-hmm.
You have in the book what you call the smart and successful,
mm-hmm.
which is the cohort that you sort of follow and study. Why the smart and successful? What's so special about this group that you felt that this is the centerpiece of your work?
So there's at least two reasons why I focused on this group. One reason is that it was just intriguing to me that the smart and successful in general aren't any happier than the not so smart or not so successful. I mean, even if they are happier, they certainly aren't as happy as you would think they could or should be. And I say this because one of the things that we think about as characteristics of the smart and successful is that these guys are really good at identifying what's truly important and then going after it and getting it. That's what makes them smart, right? That's what makes them successful, is that they're very good at identifying big goals and going after it. And all of us acknowledge that being happy, leading a meaningful life is very important to us. And so put these two things together, you would expect that smart and the successful would be very good at leading happy, fulfilling lives, because that's what is important and they're good at getting it. And it turns out that they aren't that much happier, right? If at all. So that was intriguing to me. That is one reason. The other big reason has to do with this, which is that some people ask me, the smart and the successful already kind of got their life made in many ways. They already have many of these things, they have money and all that. Why are you trying to make them happier? Why don't you look at other people who are not so smart or not so successful, and at least they deserve to be happy because they don't have the other things going for them. I actually look at it a little bit differently. The smart and the successful people are the ones who have the ability, they have a better ability to enhance the happiness of everybody around them. They are the gatekeepers to all the resources. And so if it turns out that if you can make these smart and successful people happy, and it turns out that you can't really be happy on a sustained basis unless you're also a nicer person, you're more compassionate, you're more giving, you're more kind, then what would happen naturally is that by making these smart and successful people happy, I'm triggering a kind of like, a breaking of a dam, so to speak, where they now are going to be agents of positivity. They're going to send out bigger ripple effects of positivity around them by sharing what they have, their wealth, and being more kind, being more compassionate. And so the overall lift, if you will, for society would be greater. That was my thinking in targeting the smart and successful. Of course, I also felt more qualified to talk to this group because I'm kind of embedded in that group, being a business school professor and having gotten a PhD myself, and being fortunate enough to enjoy quite a good lifestyle myself. So I kind of belong to that group in some sense, and therefore I felt that I would be able to use the language, the set of examples, etc., that this target group would find relatable.
So in the book, you identify several what you call deadly happiness sins, and then you prescribe an antidote for each of them. And the first one is that we devalue happiness.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so sometimes I call it the stupidest happiness mistake we can make. Because what devaluing happiness is knowing at one level what will make us happy and yet not being able to do it. Right? I'll give you a quick example of this. I think that many people can relate to. Imagine that you're a wonderful relationship with a great boyfriend, right? And he's like smart, he's witty, and he takes good care of you. You're into him, and he's into you, everything. But there's one area in which you would like him to improve. You would love for him to lose some weight. Okay, and you tell him things, you recommend things that he could do, like, go on a regimen and swim and this and that. He never listens to any of that, right? It's all through one ear and out the other. And then one fine day, he comes home running to you to tell you that he's met somebody at the gym, right, who's convinced him to adopt a lifestyle that is going to work for him and he's going to lose weight. He's convinced, right? She's motivated him. And you ask him, okay, who's this person, right? I mean, I've been trying to tell you all this. You don't say this to him, but you think inside your head, and you never listen to me. And now somebody else has come and convinced you, and he shows you this photograph that he's taken on his iPhone. It's a really sexy lady, right, who's convinced him to adopt this lifestyle. And so you're now curious, so what is this thing that she's told you, right? And you listen to it, and it's pretty much the thing that you've been trying to tell him all along, right? Go swimming, do this thing, eat healthy. And you have a couple of options here, okay? That's the question that I ask my participants in the studies. I describe the scenario to them and ask them, okay, supposing you were really interested in maximizing your happiness, right? Which of these two options do you think is more conducive for that goal? Option A, point out angrily to your boyfriend that the other person has told him nothing new and you've been telling him all this all along and you feel disrespected and all that. Or option B, kind of pat him on the back, congratulate him and tell him that, look, I mean, I'm sure this is going to work. Good for you, right? I'm happy for you. Most people, right, close to 90% of the people recognize that the happiness maximizing option here is to do option B, right? Congratulate him. Because I think most people realize at some level that in relationships, you can either be happy or you can be right sometimes, right? You can't be both. And yet, when I ask another group of people, so which of these two options do you think you would actually do, right? Not what will make you happy, not what your higher self knows is the right thing to do, but what would you actually do? Only about 70% say that they would actually pick option B. And so good 30% of the people are admitting, right, that they would be very tempted to shout.
And I'll bet the number is even higher.
Yeah.
Those are just the ones willing to raise
right.
their hand, but
Right.
I'm guilty as charged.
So that's the idea, is that, we often recognize what the happiness maximizing thing to do is, but then we often let other things like money or ego or fame or success or, sometimes it's beliefs, right? That I am not good at this, or that, you might have fear of failure, a kind of a belief that stops you from doing the thing that would be good for you in the long run. If you were to just overcome this fear of failure and attempt something, that would be good for you in the long run. It would make you a happier person, but that holds you back. So that's what I call by devaluing happiness. Not doing the thing that you know at some level is the happiness maximizing thing to do.
Is this something when you test these students, when you test people in your courses, do they recognize the paradox?
Absolutely. And to a lot of them, it's a little bit of a light bulb going off in their head kind of a moment, because they recognize the phenomenon. They don't sit back. They haven't kind of articulated it or sat back and used these kinds of words and examples to kind of flesh it out or concretize it in their head. And the value comes from getting people to kind of recognize that this is actually something that is hurting your happiness. People just do it and they think that, everybody does it and that's how life is. And that's it, leave it at that, without actually kind of digging a little bit deeper. And when they read the book or when they listen to my lecture, it's a little bit like, coming face to face with a mirror and becoming self-aware that I too do this. Just like you said that I'm guilty of this. Every one of us is. I coincidentally just finished teaching that lecture before I came here on Thursday. Today's Friday, right? Yesterday. And so the lecture ends with me giving out a sheet of paper in which I list a number of common ways in which people commit the fundamental happiness paradox. And I ask people to kind of self-rate themselves on how guilty they are on each of those. And then I have them discuss this with each other, which is a very valuable exercise for them.
Peel the onion a little bit into the, why do we do this? And you talk about something in the book called medium maximization, which is something a lot of us do. Talk about that and how that plays into this.
Yeah, so the kind of simplest way to understand medium maximization is to continue to pursue those things that used to boost your happiness levels but have long stopped doing so. A great example is money. Up to a certain point, money is important for your happiness until your basic necessities are met. Okay, maybe a little past that, so that you can enjoy some good comfort. Okay, but there comes a point where more money is not going to make you happier on a sustained basis, right? If you're earning, let's say, a couple of $100,000 a year, getting a $10,000 raise is going to make you happier probably for 2 or 3 months, and then you're going to go back to your base levels. It's not going to make you any happier than say compared to a situation where you were earning only $40,000 a year and now you're getting $50,000 a year. There it makes a big difference, right? But not at the $200,000 level. But nevertheless, because in our past, more money used to make us happier until we hit that point, or we see other people for whom it makes them happier, or because it does make us happier in the short run, we end up kind of subscribing to this belief that more money is going to make me more happy. And so what we end up doing is we pursue money so that we think that it's going to make us happy. And then after some point, it's like we forget about the happiness altogether, right? And we end up only pursuing the money because, we somehow deep down believe that it's going to make us happier. Even if it's not making us happier, we end up getting fixated on that medium to happiness, or the means to happiness, if you will. And so we end up collecting points, right? It's like, I don't know if you've been to Chuck E. Cheese's sometimes. They give you these tokens for playing a game well, and you can actually put in some money to get a lot of tokens out without even playing the game. Okay, and the tokens are a result of your playing the game well. And after some time, I've observed it with my kids and other kids too, that they end up losing interest in the game and they get fixated on the tokens. It's just crazy. I mean, if you just want the tokens, just sit at home. I'll go get you some tokens, right? So that's the idea that, we end up getting distracted by these mediums. So it's a very interesting phenomenon.
If the money is a means to an end, do we just focus on that means and not the end itself, which I assume is happiness for most people, because we know how to define the mean, in this case, money. It's very clear. We have a general sense of what it takes to get to that and increase our wealth. But the end, which is happiness, is sort of a fuzzy thing that people can't get their arms around. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, that's another reason why we tend to devalue happiness. One big reason is medium maximization. We just get fixated on the mediums and we end up forgetting about happiness and, in a sense, devalue happiness. The other big reason is that a lot of research has shown that if you are not clear on what your goal is, right, if you're not able to perceive it kind of concretely and visualize it and it's not clear, there's a good chance that you're not going to give it as high a priority. Okay. And I think that happiness is one of those things where, broadly speaking, everybody recognizes that ultimately they want to lead a happier life. But if you ask them to kind of articulate to you what their definition of happiness is, what would be a meaningful life, I think a lot of people would start floundering and would admit that, look, I don't know, exactly what happiness is. And so what that leads you to do then is to focus on the things that you do know, that you can define, like money. You know when your bank balance has gone from $100,000 to $200,000. But with happiness, how do you know you've gone from a 7.8 to a 8.2? It's much more difficult to quantify it. And so you end up devaluing it. And so one of the exercises that I have my students do, and in the book too, I have this exercise, which is to define happiness. You got to have a pretty clear idea of what happiness means to you. And this is actually, in a sense, more tough and more simple than you might expect it to be. It's more tough because it's not merely kind of hand waving and saying happiness is, I know it internally and I don't have to explain it. I know it when I see it, kind of a thing. I don't think that is good enough. But it's more simple again, because if you just sit down to think about it a little bit, you recognize a couple of things very, very soon. Okay, first thing you recognize, I think, is that happiness could be substituted with an alternative word, which is positive emotions. Okay, and I think that when we talk about happiness, what we mean is, so long as we're feeling one of these 10, 12 positive emotions, like a sense of joy or love or awe or hope or serenity or laughter, right, gratitude, then I think that we would agree or characterize that experience as a happy experience. That so long as you're kind of flitting around in one of these 10, 12 positive emotional states, I would think that you're being happy. And not just that, the second thing you recognize is that sometimes, actually, and this might be at first blush somewhat paradoxical, but even a negative experience could, at one level, be a positive experience and therefore a happy experience. So, for example, if you're sacrificing your meal, right, for the sake of your child, so that the child doesn't go hungry, even though at a physical level you might say that was a negative experience, at the more higher kind of values level or the intellectual level, you recognize that this was a good thing to do, right? And if you just kind of extrapolate from that example to other experiences where you might feel negative in the moment because you're striving towards a task, you're anxious, you're not sure if you're going to achieve something, but in the long run, you know that you're doing something that's worthwhile. You're aspiring to grow. You've taken on a challenge that's commensurate with your skills, and you're not just being defeatist or escapist in your life, right? You've taken on challenges that are worthy, even though you might feel anxious and feel that, at one level you're feeling negative, at another level you also recognize that this is what you ought to be doing. And so you're leading a fulfilling, meaningful. That's why the word meaningful and fulfilling are very important to kind of go along with the word happy, because happy by itself seems to connote more of a sense of temporary pleasure, if you will, as opposed to something that's more deeper, that's more meaningful. And so when we sit down to think about what happiness is, I think we quickly recognize that it's mostly these positive emotions, right? But it could also include some negative emotions.
I would imagine how you define happiness and or fulfillment when you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, the definition is going to change. Either it changes, or maybe you didn't have the clarity you thought you did when you were younger and you realize that there's more to life than what you knew in an earlier stage.
That's right. And I think that some of it has to do with this idea that, when you're younger, typically you don't have a whole lot of resources and slack and money. And therefore, you're still caught up in that struggle for basic necessities. And at that point, it looks like awesome when you think about a life in which you have unlimited sums of money and you can do whatever you want. And you're just thinking that I'm going to do more of the things that give me pleasure. I'm going to travel more. I'm going to eat more. I'm going to drink more. I'm going to sleep more, or whatever. And then you reach that point where, you're capable of doing all those things because you have the resources to do it. And then you recognize that, hey, this doesn't quite add up to a happy life. There's something missing. And that's what I meant when I said some time back that we have a critical mass of people there who know that as from personal experience. And at that point, you recognize that there also needs to be this thing called meaning, that you need to be doing something that's not merely adding to the positive pleasure kind of elements in your life, but is making you grow and contribute and transcend yourself in a sense, to think of other things beside your own self-centered interests. And that becomes very clear when you're past that point. And that typically happens when you're older.
You mentioned a second, and there's seven, I should mention, seven deadly sins, happiness sins. The second one, main other one I want to focus on, is the notion of people needing to seek superiority.
Yeah, so this is again not something that is an unknown phenomenon. I think that most people are aware that they have a desire to be superior to other people. And even if they don't recognize it within themselves, they certainly see it in other people. And I have to say that, this is contrary to what a lot of new agey, kind of spiritually oriented people might have us believe. It's not a superficial goal, and so it has to be treated very seriously, that we have this desire for superiority. And it also has to be acknowledged that when you do infer that you're superior, or other people tell you that you are superior, when you get that kind of information, it does make you feel good. And there's a lot of evidence showing that if you are in fact higher in status, you're going to enjoy a better emotional life, you're going to live longer, you're going to have less stress in your life. Not just human beings, even among lower order animals, that this has been observed. And so there is some deeper hardwired set of reasons why being of a higher status enhances the quality of our life, the quality of our well-being. Okay? And because that is there, because that's how we are, I guess, like set up, the world is set up that way, and we are hardwired to experience joy or happiness when we are superior. I think it's not surprising that many of us kind of want to seek that superiority. We want to be the richest kid on the block, keep up with the Jonases, etc. The problem is that when you go on that path of pursuing superiority or chasing superiority, it turns out that it actually undercuts your happiness in the long run.
Let me underscore this, because one of the most fascinating parts of the book for me was the fact that, going back to what you said earlier, that being superior is actually very positive from a happiness perspective.
That's right.
But the pursuing part of superiority makes people miserable. Why? Again, it's almost another paradox.
Yeah, it is a kind of a paradox. It's one of those things where you need to kind of sit down and wrap your head around it. What it is in the end, you want to be somebody who's got access to resources and is doing well in life, but in order for you to be happy, but you do not want to engage in a whole lot of social comparisons and tether your happiness to coming out superior to other people. And, so you shouldn't tether your happiness to your relative standing to other people. So it gets a little bit complicated at one level, but it's really simple at another level. Okay, what you don't want to do is constantly compare yourself to other people in order to motivate yourself to do better in life. In fact, the less you compare yourself to other people, less you pursue superiority, the better off you are, not just from happiness, but even from the standpoint of being superior. This is where it gets really interesting. Even from the standpoint of being successful, you're better off in the long run, not comparing yourself to other people, but rather immersing yourself in the work without really, it's going to be difficult to completely not compare yourself to other people. But let's say that you spend 80% of your time comparing yourself to other people and only 20% of the time kind of deriving satisfaction out of working. I would say reverse it if you can. And if you do that, then not only are you going to be happier, you're also going to see, somewhat surprisingly for many people, that you actually put yourself in a better place to be successful. Why? Because it is when your mind is not occupied by, and capacity of your mind is not taken up by comparing yourself to other people, but rather the full capacity of your mind is involved in the task itself. Do you put yourself in the best position to gain the skills and the abilities to progress faster towards being skilled, being a master of what you do? In fact, if you look at anybody around you who's we all acknowledge as being really good at what they do, you can almost take it as a given, as a guarantee that they've spent at least 10,000 hours, okay, being completely involved and immersed in the task at hand. Take a composer, or take an investment banker for that matter. Anybody, even people who are making money. You can't really progress towards mastery unless you immerse yourself in the task for a significant critical number of hours. And you deny yourself that opportunity by comparing yourself to other people, because part of your brain is now occupied by how you're doing relative to other people, so you're not able to fully immerse yourself in the task.
In this immersion you speak of is what's known as flow.
Yeah, I think that's one of the words that describes that experience of being completely immersed in an activity, yeah.
I'll share a little something with you and my audience. For years, the most stressful time every 3 months for me is when the business school bulletin, alumni bulletin would come out. And you go to your class section and you sit there and read who's retired, who's buying what companies, who's dominating the world. I'll raise my hand and admit it's very hard to not be susceptible to having your self-worth, your self-esteem to some degree tied to how am I doing relative to my peers, because that becomes your cohort to which you compare.
It is very natural. So here's the thing, right? I think that the comparisons with other people and getting evaluated is not going to go away, and neither should it go away. Here again, I differ from a lot of other people, particularly I would say that the new agey type people who recommend that let's not even compare. And I think that has tried to be operationalized through everybody's a winner kind of a way of behaving with our kids nowadays, that everybody gets a trophy and stuff like that. That's not very healthy either. That ends up leading to other problems with everybody feeling entitled to getting rewarded all the time and not being able to take negative feedback and all that. If we are to function as a society, we need to be able to evaluate people and stack them up. So you do need to get that brochure, so that if you see that, oh, this guy has moved from this industry to that industry, okay, now I have this goal. Who is the best equipped to achieve this goal? You'd be able to pick up the right guy based on that information. If we did not have any calibration, any evaluation, we would probably put an opera artist to build a bridge, right? And it would probably collapse. So as a society, we do need to have evaluations going on. What we don't do as a society, though, as well, or at all, is that we don't give our kids, our students, the skill sets and the tools required to de-link how they stack up relative to other people from their self-worth and their self-esteem. And it might seem like a difficult thing to do, and I do think that it is going to be difficult. But if you can somehow give people these abilities to not tether their self-esteem and their self-worth to how they stack up relative to other people, then that will allow us the kind of, liberty of continuing to evaluate people and tell them how they're doing, without us hurting them in a big way. That way we can function as a society in terms of achieving our kind of goals that are important for society, while at the same time and maintaining, if not enhancing, the well-being of the citizens of the society. Of course, the question is, how do you do that? How do you not let somebody's relative standing to another person affect their self-esteem, okay? And that's a huge topic.
And on that note, let's talk about the unspoken. You got the Facebook effect.
Yeah.
Here's all this, and I shouldn't pick on Facebook. It's, all of these social media tools, which on the one hand are supposed to bring us all closer together and build bridges and what have you. On the other hand, these aren't really truly authentic, transparent sites. People want to put their best face forward. Their lives, their kids' lives, their jobs, everything about it. And so you're seeing a very warped perspective. And you talk about in the book how, one of the many downsides to this comparison is that if you don't achieve it, that it can lead to depression.
Right.
And I wonder if all of the social media has actually increased that. If it's made it harder to achieve happiness, harder to, as you say, stay clear of all the comparisons and just find your own intrinsic self-worth. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. There are studies that on average show that when you're more present on social media, you spend more time on social media, you tend to be less happy. And it's clear to see why, right? Because, everybody tries and portrays their best selves on Facebook and all these other social media. And so if you go on a vacation and take, 1,000 pictures, the 10 pictures that go on Facebook are the most flattering ones, right? And you would think that the person who put those pictures at least would be happy. They've certainly made all the people that are in their friends group less happy, because they've just signaled to them how much their life sucks in comparison to your life, at least for now, right? But even the person who posts those pictures isn't too happy for very long, because he or she doesn't get as many Facebook likes as they would want, right? And so you've made other people miserable, you made yourself miserable, you made the whole world miserable, right? So that's not to say that the social media can't enhance your happiness. I do think that it can bring people closer together if you're talking about real issues, showing your real self, and or sharing information that is useful for growing or learning about a topic, etc. It can come in handy. But yeah, I do agree that, to the extent that it kind of builds this tendency to compare yourself to other people, and without having learned the ability to protect your self-worth, it is going to have detrimental effects.
So how about for the people listening that are saying, look, if I could actually find my passion and pursue my passion and have a decent, respectable living pursuing my passion, then I could probably go ahead and remove myself from all of this seeking of superiority and the social comparisons. But I don't know what that is. I'm living in reality. I've got kids to take care of. I've got a mortgage. I've got retirement to plan for, and I'm stuck in a job that I got myself into. I'm 10, 15 years, 20 years into it. I'm not sure what that passion you speak of is, and even if I did, what am I going to quit my job and all of a sudden throw caution to the wind? So what's your advice to those that hear it? Now let's take it from sort of an academic theoretical notion to what's the sort of step 1, 2, 3 for someone trying to go this direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. What can we do about the people who are now, let's say, 40, 50 years old, who have spent 10, 15, 20 years in a particular path, and they have all these mortgage bills, etc.? Here's what I would say, okay? The first thing I think to recognize is that by then, hopefully you've recognized that having more money so that you can splurge on another vacation, another car, another fancier kind of a swimming pool, etc., hopefully you've recognized that that's not the answer to deriving sustained happiness levels. And if you've recognized it, okay, then I think it's time to kind of do a little bit of a pivot, if you will, and understand that your happiness is actually far more dependent on three things. One is that you do stuff on a day-to-day basis that is actually meaningful and enjoyable. Okay, it may not be what you're doing for work, but at least try and do it outside of work. Just a couple of hours, even a couple of hours every week. Okay. Second thing is that your happiness depends a lot on relationships. So don't sacrifice that. If you've lost touch with a lot of your best friends, where you would just go out and, laugh and banter and everything, get that back into your life a little bit. Okay. Pay a little more attention to your family. Okay. Whoever it is that you're really kind of, you care a lot about. Maybe it's your kids, whatever, right? Second thing. And the third thing is that build a few habits into your life that give you a sense of internal joy, if you will, an internal sense of wellness. So, for a lot of people, it's exercising. We are hardwired, evolutionarily speaking, to derive some kind of emotional well-being out of expending effort, out of getting our heart pumping. Physical effort I'm talking about here. So, go exercise. If you're the type of person who doesn't have the self-motivation to go to the gym, then get a trainer, right? I mean, this is where the more money is going to come in helpful, that you can hire somebody to outsource that motivation to somebody else to do it, right? So those are the three things I would say.
And it doesn't feel like rocket science. It makes sense. It's very tangible. So why aren't people doing this?
I think what happens is that people recognize that, well, this makes sense and, I should do it. And then like everything else, it just gets put in the back burner, and a big reason for that is that I think I would say twofold, right? One is that they do not have the bandwidth, they're running kind of pillar to post, or whatever that expression is, right? I mean, from office back to the apartment, and then dealing with kids and families or wives and vacations and this and that. It's just an overcrowded plate, right? With lots of things to handle, and to find the kind of extra space required to execute this plan takes energy, right? And that's not very easy. That's not a very available commodity nowadays. And the second kind of, I guess a related reason, but an important reason nevertheless, is that it's almost as if people need somebody else to come with a hammer in their hands and kind of knock them on their head and say that, knock some sense into them, right? Saying that, look, this is your life. If you don't do it now, you're not going to do it later. And then these weeks and months are going to become years and decades. And you're going to end up when you're 70, kind of regretting not having had enough meaning in your life. Do it now. Right now is the chance. You're not going to get another chance to lead your life again. So that, they need somebody else to kind of almost uproot them from where they are. There's inertia in the system, and push them along. And that, unfortunately, we don't have people around like that who going around getting people off what they're doing, the meaningless rut they are in, into a more meaningful track. And if you had a kind of concrete plan, a planner that can help you with the plan, and then, also kind of keep on top of you and push you in the right way to do it, I think you'd have people doing it. But we just don't have that. Maybe it's an opportunity for some consulting services to come up on career change, following a life of passion, how to do it. I haven't seen too many of those kinds of organizations. Maybe there is an opportunity there.
When you look at all these bad habits, the devaluing happiness, the chasing superiority, the not focusing on flow and things that give you real meaning and purpose and passion, is this somehow a manifestation of our country, of capitalism, of our school system? Is this, you grew up in India. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much you studied other countries and other societies, but is this pervasive across the world, or is this something that's really flared up here?
I do think that it's flared up more in societies that are more capitalistic in nature. But what is also true is that it is the capitalistic structure that also allows us more freedom to talk about these topics in a way that couldn't be potentially talked about in other kinds of ideologies. So it's like a little bit of a mixed bag is how I would say characterize the capitalistic system. So on the one hand, it encourages you to focus on being better than other people, being competitive and getting ahead, and focus on consumption and material things and so on and so forth on the one hand. On the other hand, it also gives you the freedom to choose the kind of life that you want to live. And so I think that in a kind of ironic way, capitalism is also potentially going to come to the rescue of those who are caught in this rut. And what I mean by that is that now that capitalism has had its run for a long period of time and people are caught up in this consumerist, materialistic, overly comparison-oriented kind of a life, which they're discovering is not very good for their happiness and well-being, I think that more number of people are going to volitionally choose to not pursue these things because they have learned, a critical number of mass of people have learned that that's not very good for what ultimately matters to them, which is happiness. And so volitionally, people are going to choose to not be materialistic, not be engaged in as much social comparisons, not be as self-centered. And so what's beautiful about the capitalistic system is that it gives you the freedom of choice. And I wouldn't take that away, even if in the short run, it made people less prone to social comparisons, made people less prone to consumerism, etc. It's almost as if we had to go through that dark valley in order to emerge out on the other side.
I want to come full circle to where we started the conversation, which was that you maybe weren't in a place of happiness, fulfillment that you wanted to, which is part of an itch you had to scratch to delve into this space. Now that you've gone into it, you've done all this research, you've written the book, you've taught the classes, how has your life changed as a result? And do you feel you're at a point where you're happy and fulfilled?
Yeah, I would say that I was one of those guys who was lucky enough to be born with a relatively high level of hardwired kind of joy, so to speak. So there is a well-known phenomenon in the happiness area, which is called the set point. That is that, a good 50% or so of your happiness levels are determined by your genetic propensity. I was born a happy kid, a carefree kid. And over time, I've just learned to kind of solidify on that platform because of my interest in this, I would say. And like you mentioned some time back, I think my definition of happiness has changed over time. I think that whereas earlier it used to be more lighthearted, more joy-oriented, I think it's become a little more meaning-oriented right now. And much of that is, of course, attributable as well to just my aging and having kids and so on. So I feel right now that if I, say 20 years back, if I had been asked on a 10-point scale, what would you rate yourself? I might have given myself an 8 or so on happiness. And I wouldn't say that it's really changed that much. I think it went down to maybe a 6.5 during my midlife crisis, which like many people I went through, and then now it's bounced back to being an 8. But I feel more solid about my 8 now. It's not a 8 that is susceptible to a lot of external influences, much less so. It's much more, I feel more confident about being able to control or regulate my emotions. Not in an artificial way, it's just that I just feel more solid. I'm more discerning, I'm more self-aware, I'm more knowledgeable about the world and about myself. So those are some of the kind of ways in which I feel I've changed over time.
Does doing the research in this topic, teaching students about happiness and fulfillment, allowing them to lead richer lives, is this giving you more purpose and satisfaction than teaching the other courses?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, it has. I do think that I still can improve in being a better, I guess, moderator on the topic and getting people to experience even higher levels of benefits. As you mentioned, my Coursera course has done really well, and I want to kind of also continue to kind of reach out to people in other ways, right? Through face-to-face mediums, for example. With the other courses that I used to teach, the straight-up marketing courses, I always had a little bit of this discomfort that I'm providing these kids with the skills and the tool sets required to do good for themselves materially and for the firms that they work with and increase their market share or whatever. And I knew that, a lot of these activities are going to produce what I call externalities, so side effects for the people or animals or future generations that don't have a voice in the system. And there's always that discomfort. But with this happiness class, I have zero of that discomfort. In fact, I feel very good about what the core message is. And it needn't have turned out this way, right? It needn't have turned out that you're likely to be able to sustain happiness levels more consistently if you're a giving, kind, compassionate person. It could have very well turned out that the science showed that, if you want to be happy, just be a selfish guy, right? But the research shows that you're likely to be happy if you're compassionate. And so there's zero discomfort in talking about this topic. And I'm obviously very intrinsically interested in the topic. Okay. So there's that part too, right? I get into flow talking about this. So it's a win-win as far as I'm concerned on this topic.
Well, this has been great. I can't urge strongly enough to read this book. If you're so smart, why aren't you happy? And the Coursera course, A Life of Happiness and Fulfillment, I assume anyone can sign up to this course?
Yeah, it's still free. There was a period when they said that they were going to charge some money, but it's still free.
Fantastic. Raj, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Glenn. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. You can subscribe to the show at iTunes, Stitcher, and theartofexcellence.com. I've got one small favor to ask. If you like the show, please take a minute and leave us a review on iTunes. I would really appreciate that. I'll see you next time.